Starting off this countdown, we have the disappearing Air Force jet. Over the years, a number of military officials have disappeared while exploring UFOs. Take this case, for example. On November 23, 1953, the U.S. Air Defense Command noticed a blip on their radar in a restricted airspace over Lake Superior. Since it was in restricted space, an Air Force jet took off to investigate. There were 2 crew members on board. The men never returned home from the mission. So while out investigating the blip, they got right to the spot where it should be. On the radar, it showed that they were right on top of this blip, but they couldn't see a craft anywhere. Then ground control saw the blip veer off and vanish, as did the men inside of the jet. The United States Air Force, US Coast Guard, and Canadian Air Forces all conducted an extensive search and rescue to try and find the men, but this was sadly unsuccessful. In fact, they didn't even find signs of wreckage. To this day, no one knows what happened to the mysterious UFO, the men, or their jet.
Number 9, HD 85512b. This next planet's in HD, Chris. There you go. Put on your 3D glasses. Announced in 2011 alongside 50 other planets. Okay. HD 85512b was discovered by the High Accuracy Radial Velocity Planet Searcher instrument, or to save you some breath, HARPS for short, over in Chile. Yeah, Chile's casually exploring 50 planets over on their weekend. Okay. It's wild how some of these discoveries happened so long ago, but we don't talk about them nearly enough. Again, same deal as the Gliese 581g. This planet too, it's 3 times the size of Earth. It's actually 3.5 times bigger. Yeah, as far as commutes go, it'll take some time to get there. Yeah, we're still working on that part. The HD planet hides around 35 light years away from us. This one you can find in the constellation Vela, aka the Snail. Is it truly habitable? Is there water on this planet? Well, that's to be determined. Our boy James Webb's gonna take a peek real soon. Number 8, Gliese 581e. Wait a minute, how many Glieses are there? Is a single Gliese a goose? What's going on here? In typical part 2 fashion, I had to include another Gliese. There's actually 4 of them in total. I'm not going to do all 4 though. For more than 4 years, the HARP spectrograph attached to the ESO telescope in Chile, they were finding groundbreaking discoveries for 4 years straight. Astronomers found the lightest exoplanet so far to this day. The lightest planet, that's crazy. This one is quite small compared to others on this list. Gliese 581e is only twice the mass of our Earth, whereas the planet furthest out, Gliese 581d, orbits its star every 67 days. While Gliese 581e completes its orbit every 3 days. You know what I mean? Yeah, having a birthday every 3 days? Oh, what a nightmare that would be. I'm never going to this planet. This one can stay off our radar. Little small Gliese, little Gliese. Number 7, carbon on Mars. It's one thing to have Elon Musk tweeting about going to Mars or whatever he's doing over there, buying Twitter, I guess. But when NASA talks about it, I get a weird feeling, you know? It's NASA, you know? They're old school. They're like, we may have found carbon 40 years ago. Yeah. That's just it, that's the tweet. In 2022, just back in January, NASA's Curiosity rover measured carbon signatures on Mars. This is huge. Paul Mahaffey, principal investigator of the sample analysis at Mars, he says, quote, "We're finding things on Mars that are tantalizingly interesting, but we would really need to get more evidence to say that we've identified life." End quote. Okay, so we're close. It sounds like we're a little close. I don't know. Side note, imagine going on a Willy Wonka trip to Mars with Elon. Do we want to go? Like, he's announcing all these trips to Mars. I don't want to do that. I can't even drive to Ottawa for 4 hours, let alone Mars for years. No way. I'm homesick already. Number 6, Ryan Graves' UFO sightings. I mentioned this a little bit back in part 1, but I of course have to add more. Back in 2017, a $22 million defense program was put in place. It was called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Now its purpose was to study military encounters with UFOs. And at this point, Navy pilots were coming out with their own story. Their eyewitness account of seeing a UAP, or a UFO if you're old school. Eventually, come 2019, senators felt the need to be briefed on these sightings. It was that serious. After a vote by the Senate Intelligence Committee in June 2020, it was agreed that UAP reports were now to get added to the Intelligence Authorization Act for 2021 and going forward. That's crazy. That's why more and more footage is coming out now every other week, you know what I mean? These incidents were filmed ages ago, but only now are they being released. It's kind of cool. According to the Times, 120 incidents were studied during this case, and it turns out the US military is not responsible for any of the 120. If they happen to be advanced drones sent to spy on the military, it's kind of important to find out who sent them, know what I mean? And recently, a former Navy pilot, Ryan Graves, he spoke out to 60 Minutes, and he explained that these UAPs would pop up during training exercises every day for at least a couple of years. He says, and I quote, If these were tactical jets from another country that were hanging out up there, it would be a massive issue. But because it looks slightly different, we're not willing to actually look at the problem in the face. We're happy to just ignore the fact that these are out there watching us train every day. That's a quote from Ryan Graves, real pilot. And these are goosebumps from me. Awesome, I'm terrified. Are aliens real? What are we doing, man? Like, let's move on before I faint. My gosh. Number 5. Milky Way radio burst. On April 28, 2020, 2 radio telescopes detected an intense pulse of radio waves, and they only lasted just a millisecond, but they left astronomers baffled. The reason for this is because this was the first time a fast radio burst had been detected this close to Earth. This signal was located only 30,000 light years from Earth, which places it in our Milky Way galaxy. That's pretty damn close. The Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Mapping Experiment, or again, CHIME if you want to save breath, they explained that the signal was so easy to pick up that CHIME wasn't even looking its direction and it still noticed the signal. It was loud and clear right in their peripheral vision. And another telescope, STARE 2, also saw it clear as day. Well, it looks like whatever the cause for the signal, someone or something, we saw it. So now what? We found you. You can come out now. Number 4. The Lorimer Burst. This is a fast radio burst that was detected long ago. This was back in 2007, and it was named, of course, after the person who spotted it, Duncan Lorimer. Well, actually, it was discovered when Duncan assigned his student, David Narkovic, to look through archival data taken in 2001 by the Parkes radio dish in Australia. That's when they noticed. After analyzing this data, it was found that there was a dispersed burst that occurred on July 24th, 2001. This burst was less than 5 milliseconds long, and it was located just 3 degrees from the small magellanic cloud. It still isn't quite clear what caused said signal, but it's thought that perhaps it may have been a singular event, such as a supernova, or an Avengers level threat. One of the two. Number 3. Light shifts. Back in 2015, a Penn State astronomer named Jason Wright explained that there were pretty erratic and spontaneous shifts in the light that was coming from a star that was newly discovered. Yeah, shifts in light. What's that about? This star sits about 1,280 light years away from Earth, and these shifts were very similar, as if something was passing in front of our view of the star. Scientists weren't able to connect this to any exoplanets or meteors or anything like that, so in turn, Jason whipped up an interesting theory that's lived rent-free in my head ever since. He stated that it's possible that the shifts are caused by massive objects passing in front of the star in a slow orbit, like an array of massive satellites or a structure, like the type of thing that would be produced by an intelligent and civilized life form. Or maybe it's an asteroid. One of the two. Either way, I'm scared. Again. Number 2. Mount Rainier. Not to be confused with Mount Chiliad, although there's definitely aliens there as well. Mount Rainier in Washington was bumping and buzzing back in 1947. Pilot Kenneth Arnold made the first modern report of a flying saucer, or a UAP. Apparently it was a flying egg, actually, that's what it looked like. Kenneth saw 9 circular-shaped objects flying in formation, the classic formation, and they were flying at twice the speed of sound. So the Idaho pilot told the Air Force, and they laughed it off. They didn't believe him at all. He took this claim to his grave. Kenneth stood by what he saw until his death later in 1984. He said that he saw UAPs. He reached out to the Seattle Times in 1977, long before the movie Signs was made, and he said, "I made my report because I thought it was my duty. It was the only proper and American thing to do. I saw what I saw." End quote. And also end point. I'm again terrified. And finally, number 1. The lights. Okay, imagine you're driving home one night after a long shift at work. Maybe you worked late and it's midnight. You're driving and you see a V formation, the classic formation, in the sky made up of yellow and orange lights. Do you pull over? Do you assume you're just, beyond exhausted and maybe this is all in your head? Because that's what I would do. Back in 2001, on July 14th, drivers along the New Jersey Turnpike saw just that. It was a touch after midnight and cars legit pulled over and people got out to get a better look at what was in the sky. Everybody looked at this thing for around 15 minutes. It was just hovering over top of the Arthur Kill waterway right between Staten Island and New Jersey. Just floating there, just doing alien stuff. One eyewitness, Joe Mavasio, recalls the sighting as one of the most amazing things he had ever seen. And then just like that, the lights vanished. They faded out one by one in typical alien fashion. Daniel Tarrant of the Carteret Police Department recalls seeing this with his own eyes as well. It was 16 golden covered lights in a V formation. Aliens are fun and all, but keep your eyes on the roads, my friends, I'm not looking at anything. Aliens or not, 10 and 2, we're getting home. That's it. Seatbelts, I'm checking those mirrors. No aliens back there, we're good. Kicking off the list at number 10, Gliese 581G. Kicking this list off with an exoplanet hiding in the constellation Libra. Yeah, to all my fellow Libras out there, this one's for you. Happy early birthday. It was discovered back in 2010, but Gliese 581G, still to this day, its confirmation is hard to pinpoint. Yeah, the thing with exoplanets is that they're a little far away. They're a little hard to see out there. But somehow the fine minds over at the University of Puerto Rico at Arecibo calls Gliese 581 the top candidate for alien life. You heard it here, folks. There we go. It's only sitting 20 light years away from our very own sun, and Gliese 581G is 3 times as large as Earth. So to all my Libras, bring a friend or two. Let's party it up. We got room. If you're a fan of New Year's parties, again, this is the planet for you. Every 30 days, we're counting down to a new year. So we don't have to wait too long to party. Off to a good start.
Coming in at number 9, we have Kenneth Arnold. In 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold was traveling to Washington for a business trip when he saw a bright light reflecting off the side of his plane. That's when he saw 9 aircrafts flying by him in a V formation. He claims that these crafts were moving at 1,700 miles per hour. In fact, this sighting gave birth to the name Flying Saucer. In a report, Kenneth said that they were moving as a saucer if you skip it over water. But the newspapers were like, saucer! He said it was a saucer! So yeah, that's the origin story of that word. To this day, we still don't know what Kenneth saw. And then later that year, the Roswell UFO incident happened. Coincidence? I think not. In our 8th spot, we have the first reported UFO. The first reported UFO sighting in America was in 1639 and was recorded by Massachusetts Governor John Winthrop. He claims that on March 1st, a man named James Everall was out on his boat when he saw a great light in the sky. It stood still, just hovering in the sky, and was described as being squarish in shape. When the lights disappeared, James and his boating pals found themselves 1 mile upstream, although they have no memory of ever traveling there. In our 7th spot, we have the East Mountain Radar Base. The East Mountain Radar Base in Vermont was a US Air Force base used during the Cold War. While in 1961, a number of men at the base reported a strange object flying in the sky. The object was located above the East Mountain and chilled there for about 18 minutes before taking off. Several military reports were actually filed after this incident. Now, what's strange is a couple of months later, a couple had a very scary UFO encounter, so people think that they saw the same UFO as the base did. In our 6th spot, we have Betty and Barney Hill. Now, this is one of the most famous alien abduction stories of all time, and it involves the couple that I just mentioned. So on September 19th, 1961, husband and wife Barney and Betty Hill were driving home one night after having a vacation in Niagara Falls. Around midnight, they saw this weird bright falling star in the sky. That was until they realized that whatever it wasn't falling, it was following them. So Barney pulled over, and sure enough, this bright thing was coming right at them. When it got closer, they saw humanoids inside of a rotating 40-foot long UFO spacecraft. The next thing that they remember is hearing a bunch of beeps, and then they passed out. They woke up 2 hours later and were 35 miles down the road from where they originally pulled over. They reported what happened to them, and obviously people were skeptical. But a lot of things prove that they were right. Both Barney and Betty had scrapes on the top of their shoes, suggesting that they had been dragged somewhere. Betty also had these marks on her dress as well. And they underwent a series of interviews, and everything they said always matched. To this day, we don't know what to think. And to this day, the story gives me the creeps. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Valentine UFO sighting. In July of 1965, a French farmer named Maurice Masse claimed he saw a spherical craft land in a lavender field and then saw 2 humanoid creatures exit. When they saw Maurice, one of the aliens pointed some object at him and he became paralyzed. The 2 then flew away. 20 minutes later, he finally was able to move again. Now, you might be like, he's lying, because honestly that was my initial reaction. But the UFO craft left a deep hole in the spot it landed. Later on, all the plants in that area died. And what's weird is that the area had a high amount of calcium. Why is that? I don't know, but it's weird. In our fourth spot, we have the Newtown Lights. On May 26, 1987 in Newtown, Connecticut, airline pilot Randy Edding decided to go for his daily nighttime walks. He liked to go out and just watch the skies, and he would like to play this game with himself, which was identify the passing planes. Well, at around 9:45 that night, he saw some strange orange and red lights pass by him. He had never seen such a sight, so he ran and got his neighbor's attention and told them to come outside. They saw a large round flying aircraft emitting bright multicolored lights. They saw it disappear over Interstate 84. Well, sure enough, cars on Interstate 84 saw this craft as well. They even pulled over to watch it. Some say they were forced to pull over because this craft made their car die. More than 200 people called the police and reported this UFO. According to some witnesses, the object was larger than a football field and was hovering in the air before vanishing into thin air. Moving on to number 3, we have Deputy Val Johnson. On August 27, 1979, Marshall County Sheriff's Deputy Val Johnson in Minnesota was out on patrol when he saw a strange bright light on part of the highway. Initially, he thought it was a crashed semi or a plane that needed to make an emergency landing, so he went to go investigate. But as he got close, he said that this light jumped through his windshield, hitting him like a 200-pound pillow. He was knocked completely out. When he woke up, he radioed for help, and his call to dispatch went as so. Something just hit my car, something attacked my car. I heard the glass breaking and the locks. The brakes locked up. I don't know what's going on. Now, when the police got to him, they found John with his teeth fractured at the gum line, and his eyes were badly burnt. His car was smashed, and there was this weird mark on the top of his hood. To this day, there's no explanation for what happened to him besides aliens. In our second spot, we have Levelland, Texas. Back in 1957, dozens of residents in Levelland, Texas reported seeing a weird object in the sky that would interfere with their vehicles. The first person to report it was a man who was driving on a country highway with his friend. He saw a 200-foot long rocket rise up from a field and rush towards them. It was about to hit them, so they jumped out of the car and landed in a ditch. As it passed their truck, it caused it to rock side to side, and it killed the truck's engine. After that report was phoned in, the authorities received more and more similar reports. Drivers would see this spacecraft fly towards them, and as soon as it did, their cars would die. Police thought it was a hoax until they went out and also witnessed this mysterious craft and lights for themselves. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Exeter Incident. On September 3rd, 1965, a policeman was patrolling Route 101 in Exeter, England, when he saw a woman parked alongside the road. So he pulled over and got out to check on her. When he got to the woman's car, he found her out of breath and frantic. She claimed that a flying object with red flashing lights was chasing her. But that's not all. A few hours later, a young man arrived at the police station saying that he was trying to hitch a ride when he saw lights come out from a large field, then disappear, and then reappear behind the tree lines several times. The same police officer that found the woman decided to go with this man to the spot and see what was up. That's when he saw the lights himself. The following weeks, the police received over 60 reports from people who also saw these lights, all with very similar stories. How eerie. Starting off this countdown, we have the Belgian UFO Wave. From November 29, 1989 to April 1990, residents in Belgium reported thousands of UFO sightings. Over this 5-month period, 13,500 people claimed to see a large, silent, triangular object hovering in the sky. 2,600 of these residents actually filed written statements on them. In spring of 1990, a number of military fighter pilots also saw this craft. They proceeded to chase it, but it ended up disappearing out of sight before they could see what was up with it. The government was like, oh, they're just helicopters. But helicopters are loud and not triangular, so nice try. Others believe that citizens were going delusional from eating chips with mayonnaise. Yes, you heard me correctly. I mean, it's a disgusting combo, but you're not gonna hallucinate and see spaceships from eating it. But let me know in the comments below, how do you dip your fries and what sauce? Moving on at number 9, we have the Tehran UFO. In the early hours on September 19, 1976, a shiny object was reported hovering in the skies above Tehran by at least 4 different people. As a result, 2 Imperial Iranian Air Force F-4 Phantom II jets set off to explore this mystery object. However, while nearing this object, their craft began to fail. They were going to open fire on it, but their weapons system was down. Not only that, but officers described the light as, and I quote, flashing with intense red, green, orange, and blue lights, so bright that I was not able to see its body. What's weird is that as soon as their jets moved away from the craft, their systems returned to normal. He then watched the craft, and I quote, slow down and land gently on the ground, radiating a high, bright light. The next day, they explored the area where the craft landed, and a number of residents said that they heard a loud noise and a bright flash of light during the night. In our 8th spot, we have the 6 soldiers. This next UFO encounter took place in North Korea in 1951 during the Korean War and impacted a number of Korean soldiers. So in May of 1951, Korean soldiers were preparing to bomb a nearby village when they were greeted by a strange craft. According to the men, the craft emitted some form of a ray that made their airburst start to explode. One man then said that they were attacked by some ray that was emitting pulses. Like a lighthouse light, you could see when it was aimed directly at you and when it wasn't. Well, after this weird attack, the men were left sick and had to be taken to the hospital. Some say that they were attacked by a UFO. Others say that they were attacked by some sort of death ray. To this day, we still don't know what attacked them and what caused them to fall so ill. Moving on at number 7, we have Skinwalker Ranch. Now this place has been known to be filled with supernatural activity. Not only do evil shape-shifting entities roam the land, but apparently aliens and UFOs do too. According to the original owner, Terry Sherman, him and his wife had a number of chilling experiences there. This ultimately led to them selling his plot of land. For starters, in June of 1996, mysterious crop circles kept appearing. Then, on a number of occasions, they saw UFOs hovering around their property. The worst is when they kept finding their cattle completely mutilated. This was not done by an animal, as it was done without bloodshed, and the cuts were very precise. For years, the government and military have been exploring Skinwalker Ranch to try and make sense of this situation. But they haven't, honestly. In our 6th spot, we have Falcon Lake. This incident has been named one of the most famous Canadian UFO encounters. It all started on May 20th, 1967, when 2 glowing objects descended from the sky near Falcon Lake in Manitoba. This was witnessed by a man named Stefan Michalak. Apparently, one of the weird crafts landed close to him, so he decided to investigate, like a dummy, which was a terrible idea. When he got close to it, it suddenly shot back into the sky. The beam of light from the craft as it took off set Stefan's clothes on fire. He was left with a bunch of strange burns on his body, including burn marks on his chest and a pattern of dots. Following the encounter, he fell ill. Now, some people believe the story to be a hoax, but he literally has burn marks on his body and scorched clothes as proof. So it makes you think otherwise. You're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the 2 fishermen. On October 11th, 1973, 2 friends, Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson, decided to go out fishing on a river in Mississippi. That's when a big bright light came out of nowhere. Parker reported, and I quote, "It was a blinding light. It was hard to tell with the light so bright, but it looked like it was shaped like a football. I would say, just estimating, that it was about 80 foot. It made very little sound, and it was just a hissing noise." But it gets weirder. He then claims that 3 legless creatures came out of the vessel and towards the 2. They described them as having mitten-shaped claws. One was necklace and gray, the other was more feminine. The friends started to freak out, and that's when these creatures wrapped their hands around their neck. Upon doing so, they calmed down. Parker thinks that they were injected with something, and that's why they immediately calmed down. After that, he claims that they went on board the vessel and were experimented on. When they got out of there, they alerted the police, who alerted the military. In fact, the 2 men were interrogated a number of times because of how wild their story was. Moving on to number 4, we have the Mutated Sergeant. This story is one that genuinely freaks me out. So back in 1956, an American Air Force Sergeant, Jonathan P. Levitt, and Major William Cunningham were out collecting the debris from a recent missile launch in New Mexico. While doing so, the 2 separated and decided to go their own ways. After a while, Major William heard his sergeant let out a loud scream. As he rushed towards him, he saw the sergeant being lifted up by a UFO, then pulled him inside the craft before zooming away. When his colleagues found William, he was in complete shock from what he had saw, and he was taken to the hospital. Of course, no one believed him. They were like, there's no way that he was abducted by a UFO, okay. But after researching, they did find that an unidentified object was present on their radar at the time of the abduction. Now, what happened to the abducted man? Well, 3 days later, his body was found 10 miles away. It was severely mutilated and drained of blood. Isn't that freaky? So it seems like he was literally abducted by aliens and then they killed and ate him or something. What makes this even more suspicious is that the government reports on this just suddenly vanished into thin air. Moving on to number 3, we have pilot Frederick Valentine. On October 21st, 1978, Australian pilot Frederick Valentine was partaking in a 125 nautical mile training flight when he disappeared into thin air. Now, it's important to note that Frederick was a very experienced pilot. So around 7:06 p.m. that night, he radioed his crew saying that an unidentified craft was following him. He described it as having 4 bright lights with a shiny metallic exterior. His final words were, "It is hovering and it's not an aircraft." Then his signal cut out. Frederick or his craft were never seen again. Now, many people believe that he was shot down or abducted by a UFO. In fact, an unidentified farmer in the area said that he saw a UFO nearly 90 feet in length hovering above his farm. He saw this during the morning of Frederick's disappearance. He then said that he also saw a plane stuck to the UFO leaking oil. Moving on to number 2, we have Terrell Copeland. In 2007, former United States Marine Terrell Copeland had his first experience with an alien. He was in his apartment when he saw an orb of light outside. He said, and I quote, "It was just a big ball of light. It wasn't moving. One was solid white. The other was directly across the street from it, up 300 feet above ground, and was changing colors very rapidly." The next thing he remembers is feeling as though something was wrong and he passed out. When he woke up, he heard someone entering his apartment. The person was moving the doorknob and scratching at the door trying to get in. He tried getting up from his bed, but he was completely paralyzed. He tried to reach for a weapon that he had, but that's when he heard a voice through the door tell him, "You don't need that weapon. We won't harm." When he finally was able to move, he lost 4 hours of his time. He believes that he was abducted by aliens. He said that he remembers being in a room with a woman who was definitely not human. He said, and I quote, "She had the typical black eyes you hear about. She had an elongated skull, and that startled me. And the next memory I have is me standing on my balcony waving at this cylinder-shaped ship." That's freaky. Do any of you guys have a good alien abduction story? Let me know in the comments below. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Boy Scouts. On August 19th, 1952, a scoutmaster and his Boy Scouts were on their way home from a retreat when they encountered a bright flash near West Palm Beach, Florida. The Scouts master originally thought it was a downed plane or a car accident, so he pulled over and got out to help. He told the Scouts to stay in the car and alert someone if he didn't return in 15 minutes. So he got out with his flashlight and an axe and went towards where he saw the bright lights. This ended up taking him to a wooded area. About 4 minutes in, he started to smell something very nauseating. Then he felt like he was being watched by somebody. The next thing he remembers is feeling heat on the top of his body. He looked up and saw a hovering, glowing object above him. He started to back away from the craft when he heard a noise like metal against metal. A hatch then opened and he saw a red flare come out towards him. The next thing he knew, he was unconscious. When he awoke, he was leaning against a tree but was completely blind. His eyes had been burned by the light. When authorities found him, he was incoherent, terrified, and freaking out. Stories like this trip me out because, like, if it wasn't an alien or a UFO, then what was it, you know?